What happens when a single text message, sent to the wrong number, becomes the catalyst for a love story that defies all the rules? Emma thought she was texting her hookup, but her provocative words ended up in the hands of Thomas Whitmore, a cold and controlling millionaire who interpreted her message in a completely different way. One misdirected message, two strangers, and a proposal that would change everything. But what happened next? Neither of them could have imagined. If this story intrigued you, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments. Where are you listening to this story from? Your support is what keeps stories like this alive. Emma adjusted her vintage earrings one more time, watching her reflection in the boutique's antique mirror. The soft afternoon light filtering through the Brooklyn storefront created golden highlights in her reddish-brown hair, and for a moment, she felt beautiful. The kind of beautiful that made her think about Ryan's hands tracing her collarbone the night before. Her phone buzzed against the glass counter, displaying Ryan's name, and instantly her pulse quickened. He'd been on her mind all morning, especially after the way he whispered her name before leaving her apartment at dawn. Emma looked around the empty boutique. Mrs. Chen was at lunch, and the next customer wasn't expected for another hour. Perfect timing. Her fingers moved across the screen with practiced confidence, crafting words that would make him think about her for the rest of his workday. I can't stop thinking about last night, the way you touched me. I want to feel your hands on me again. Tonight, I'm yours, completely, no limits. Tell me what you want to do to me. She hit send before she could second-guess herself, that familiar rush of bold satisfaction warming her chest. Emma had always been direct about what she wanted, and Ryan loved that about her. At least, she hoped he loved it. But when she set the phone down, something felt off. A small voice in the back of her mind whispered that she should double-check, but she ignored it. She'd texted Ryan hundreds of times. She knew his number by heart. Didn't she? Meanwhile, 30 floors above Manhattan, in a glass-walled office that looked out over the city like a throne, Thomas Whitmore was reviewing quarterly reports when his phone chimed. He rarely received personal messages during business hours. His life was scheduled down to the minute, every interaction calculated and purposeful. The unknown number made him pause. Thomas didn't deal with unknown numbers. His assistant filtered everything. His contacts were vetted. And spontaneous communication was something he'd systematically eliminated from his existence. Yet here was a message, bold and explicit, sitting on his screen like a challenge to his perfectly controlled world. He read it once, twice. The words were direct, provocative, and strangely refreshing. In his world of corporate speak and carefully constructed conversations, this raw honesty was almost shocking. Thomas leaned back in his leather chair, the city sprawling below him like a chessboard. He'd built his empire by reading people, understanding what they wanted before they even knew it themselves. This message, it wasn't random. Someone was offering exactly what many women had offered him before, but with a refreshing lack of pretense. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Most men might simply ignore the message, maybe respond with "wrong number." But Thomas Whitmore wasn't most men. He was a businessman first, always, and this felt like business. "Interesting proposition," he typed. 3,000 for 3 hours. My penthouse tomorrow at 7 p.m. Discreet, professional, no complications. Are you available? He hit send without hesitation. If this was what he thought it was, the transaction would be simple and straightforward. If it wasn't, he'd find out soon enough. Emma's phone buzzed, just as she was helping a customer choose between 2 silk scarves. She glanced at the screen and felt her stomach drop to her knees. The response wasn't from Ryan. It was from an unknown number, and the words made her hands shake. "Just give me 1 second," she managed to tell the customer, positioning herself behind the counter with trembling fingers. She read the message again, each word hitting her like ice water. $3,000. Penthouse. Professional. The implication was crystal clear, and it was mortifying. Her fingers flew across the screen. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. That was meant for someone else. Completely wrong number. Please just delete that and pretend it never happened." The response came almost immediately. "I understand. However, you presented an offer, and I made a counter-offer. Are you declining?" Emma stared at the phone, torn between horror and something else she couldn't name. There was something about the response, so controlled, so matter-of-fact, that intrigued her despite her embarrassment. "I wasn't making an offer," she typed back. "That message was private and personal, sent to the wrong person by mistake." "Everything is business, Miss Emma." And no, not everything is business. Emma. Even in text, her name seemed to carry weight when he wrote it. "I'm Thomas, and I disagree. You interrupted my afternoon with a rather vivid proposition. The least you could do is consider my response." She should have stopped there, should have apologized once more and blocked the number. But something about his directness, the way he seemed completely unfazed by her embarrassment, made her curious. "Did you really think I was—" she typed, then deleted it. Started again. "Do you always respond to random messages by offering money? I respond to opportunities. You presented one, I evaluated it, and made an offer. That's how business works." "This isn't business, Thomas. This is my life you're talking about like a transaction." "Isn't everything a transaction, Emma? Time, attention, affection. We all trade something for something else." The customer cleared her throat, reminding Emma where she was. She looked up to see the woman tapping her watch impatiently. "I'll take both scarves," the customer announced, clearly irritated by the delay. While Emma processed the sale, her phone kept buzzing with messages from Thomas. Each response was more intriguing than the last, each one pulling her deeper into a conversation she never meant to have. When the customer left, Emma realized she'd been holding her breath. She looked down at her phone, at this strange exchange with a man who spoke in absolutes and saw the world in terms of negotiations. Who was Thomas Whitmore, and why couldn't she stop wanting to know what he'd say next? The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze for Emma. Every time she tried to focus on organizing clothes or helping the occasional customers, her phone would buzz again. Thomas Whitmore, that name was starting to echo in her mind like a puzzle she couldn't solve. "Are you still there, Emma?" The message appeared on her screen at 3:30. She hesitated, fingers hovering over the keyboard. The sensible thing would be to block the number and move on with her life. But there was something magnetic about the way he wrote her name, as if it were an equation he was trying to solve. "Unfortunately, yes," she replied. "And are you still there making indecent proposals to strangers?" "Only to the interesting ones." Emma felt heat rise up her neck. He had a way of turning every exchange into a game, and against her better judgment, she was enjoying playing. "And what makes you think I'm interesting? You don't even know me." "You're responding." The simplicity of the answer left her speechless for a moment. He was right. She was responding, participating in this strange dance when she could simply ignore him. In his office, Thomas pushed the reports aside. Emma had become more interesting than any financial projection. There was an authenticity in her responses that intrigued him. No elaborate games, no obvious attempts to impress him. She was direct, even when she was clearly out of her comfort zone. His assistant, Margaret, appeared in the doorway with a stack of documents. "Mr. Whitmore, the merger contracts are ready for review, and Senator Harrison confirmed dinner for Thursday." Thomas waved distractedly, his eyes still glued to his phone. "Cancel dinner with Harrison." Margaret frowned. She'd worked for Thomas for 8 years and had never seen him cancel an important commitment on a whim. "Sir, may I ask why? I have something more interesting to do on Thursday." When Margaret left, clearly confused, Thomas turned his attention back to his phone. A new message from Emma awaited him. "All right, I'll bite. What makes a man like you, assuming you are who you say you are, respond to a message like that instead of just deleting it?" Thomas smiled, a rare expression on his normally controlled face. "Maybe I'm bored." How sad. A bored, powerful man is a dangerous man. "Do you think I'm dangerous?" There was a long pause before her response came. "I'm starting to think you might be." Emma closed the boutique at 6, but instead of heading straight home, she sat on the bench outside, unable to stop typing. The conversation had evolved into something she couldn't define. Part provocation, part interrogation, part flirtation. "Tell me about yourself," came Thomas's message. "Is this part of your opportunity assessment?" Pure curiosity. "I'm 26, work at a boutique in Brooklyn, live alone in an apartment that would fit in your closet, and apparently have the bad habit of texting wrong numbers. And the man who was supposed to receive the original message? The question caught her off guard. She'd almost forgotten about Ryan amid this electrifying verbal exchange. "It's complicated," she typed. "Most interesting things are. What about you? Tell me about the mysterious Thomas who makes indecent offers to strangers. 34, CEO, live in a penthouse that could probably fit your entire building, and apparently have the bad habit of turning misunderstandings into opportunities. CEO of what? Boring things that make a lot of money." Emma laughed out loud, earning curious looks from passers-by. There was humor behind his arrogance, a self-awareness that made his confidence more palatable. "Are you always this evasive? Are you always this curious?" Touché. Her phone buzzed with a call. Ryan. For the first time in hours, she hesitated before answering. "Hi," she said, her voice sounding strangely guilty. "Emma, sorry I didn't respond to your message earlier. I had meetings all day. How about dinner tonight? I can be at your place in an hour." She looked at the phone in her hand, at the conversation with Thomas still open on the screen. "Actually, Ryan, I don't think I can tonight. I'm tired." There was a pause. "Everything okay? You sound different." "I'm fine. I just need a night to myself." After she hung up, she stared at the phone for a long moment. A new message from Thomas was blinking on the screen. "Still there? Still here? Good. I was starting to get bored again. And that would be terrible, wouldn't it? Devastating." Emma smiled, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time, the thrill of discovery, of the unknown. Thomas Whitmore was arrogant, controlling, and probably dangerous to her peace of mind. But he was also intelligent, provocative, and completely different from any man she'd ever met. "Thomas?" "Yes?" "This conversation. Where is it going?" There was a long pause before the response came. "Wherever you want it to go, Emma. But something tells me you've already decided." She stared at the words on the screen, her heart beating faster. He was right. Somehow, in just a few hours, Thomas Whitmore had awakened a curiosity in her that was impossible to ignore. And the scariest part? She didn't want to ignore it. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed her response, knowing she was about to cross a line from which there would be no return. 3 days had passed since Emma had typed her last response to Thomas, a response she never sent. Her hands had trembled so much that she ended up closing the app and promising herself she wouldn't open it again. But promises made to oneself were the easiest ones to break. She was organizing a new shipment of dresses when her phone rang. Not a text, a call. Unknown number. Her heart raced because somehow she knew who it was. "Hello." Her voice came out more hesitant than she intended. "Emma." The voice was deep, controlled, with an accent that suggested expensive education and power. "Thomas Whitmore, how did you get my number?" "I have resources and patience. You disappeared in the middle of an interesting conversation." Emma stepped away from the counter, walking to the boutique window. Outside, Brooklyn continued its familiar rhythm, but inside her head, everything had changed since that deep voice had spoken her name. "I didn't disappear. I made a sensible decision." Sensible is a boring word. "And you clearly have issues with boredom." She heard him laugh, a low, rich sound that made something tighten in her stomach. "Meet me for dinner. Tonight." "Absolutely not." "Why?" "Because you're a stranger who makes inappropriate offers and apparently gets phone numbers from people who didn't give them to you." "Touché. But you're curious about me. If you weren't, you would have blocked my number 3 days ago." Emma closed her eyes, hating that he was right. "Thomas, the Riverside, 8 o'clock. If you don't show up, I promise never to bother you again." The call ended before she could respond. Emma stared at the phone, torn between frustration and an excitement she didn't want to admit. The Riverside was one of the most expensive restaurants in Manhattan, the kind of place that appeared in luxury magazines and where a glass of wine cost more than she made in a day. Thomas adjusted his shirt cuffs for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt nervous before a date. Nervous about anything, really. His life was built on certainties, but Emma Taylor had become a beautiful uncertainty. At 8:15, he was beginning to accept that she wouldn't come when he saw her. Emma entered the riverside like she was invading a world she didn't belong to, which, Thomas realized, was exactly the case. She wore a simple black dress that had probably cost less than the tip he'd give the waiter, but there was a natural elegance about her that made the jewelry-laden women at other tables seem overdone. "You came," he said, standing as she approached, "against my better judgment." Emma sat down, her eyes taking in the opulent surroundings. "This place is a lot. You get used to it." "I'm not sure I want to get used to it." Thomas studied her face, the way she held her shoulders slightly tense, how her eyes avoided meeting his directly. "You're nervous." "I'm not nervous. I'm cautious. There's a difference." "What's the difference?" "Nervous implies I care what you think of me. Cautious means I know I should run." Thomas smiled. "And why aren't you running?" Emma finally met his eyes. "I'm still deciding." The dinner unfolded like a careful dance, each testing the other's boundaries, advancing and retreating in a rhythm that was part seduction, part negotiation. Thomas discovered that Emma was smarter than he'd expected, more challenging too. She wasn't impressed by his money or power, and that was refreshing. "Why did you really ask me here?" Emma asked when they were on dessert that she'd barely touched. "Business proposal." "Ah, we're back to that." Thomas leaned forward, his voice lowering. 3 months, 10,000 a month. You accompany me to social events, dinners, some trips, nothing more. Emma nearly choked on her wine. "Are you serious?" "Completely." "Why would I do that?" "Because you need money, and I need companionship that doesn't come with ulterior motives." "How do you know I need money?" Thomas hesitated. He'd investigated Emma, found out about the rented apartment, the boutique job, her mother's medical bills, but something about the vulnerability in her eyes stopped him from revealing how deep he'd dug. "Intuition," he lied. Emma laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. $30,000 to pretend to like you for 3 months. To accompany me. Liking me is optional. She stood up abruptly. "Thank you for dinner, Thomas. But I'm not for sale." He watched her head for the door, part of him admiring her dignity, part wondering if he'd miscalculated. But when she reached the door, her phone rang. She looked at the screen, and he saw her face go pale. Emma answered, walking outside the restaurant. Thomas couldn't hear the conversation, but he saw through the glass window, the exact moment her shoulders collapsed, when she leaned against the wall as if the world had crashed down on her. When she came back, her eyes were red but dry. "My mother," she said simply. "The cancer has spread. There's an experimental treatment, but insurance won't cover it. $45,000. Thomas said nothing, just waited. $15,000 a month, Emma said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. 6 months. And for the first 2 weeks, you don't touch me. Not even a handshake. Done. And if I decide I can't do it anymore, I can leave at any time." Thomas extended his hand. "Done." Emma looked at his hand for a long moment before shaking it. The touch was brief, professional, but Thomas felt something like electricity run through his skin. "This isn't about you or me," Emma said, her words more to herself than to him. "This is about my mother." "Of course," Thomas agreed, but they both knew she was lying. As he watched Emma sign the contract his lawyer had prepared in record time, Thomas wondered if he was buying her companionship, or if he'd just made the most dangerous deal of his life. A week later, Emma found herself in the mirror of a Bergdorf Goodman fitting room, staring at a version of herself she barely recognized. The navy silk dress cost more than her income for 3 months, and the personal shopper Thomas had hired circled around her like an artist perfecting her masterpiece. "Perfect for tonight's charity dinner," the woman murmured, adjusting an invisible pleat. "Mr. Whitmore has impeccable taste." Emma bit her tongue to keep from responding that Thomas hadn't chosen the dress. He'd simply given her a spending limit that made her dizzy. Over the past weeks, she'd been measured, fitted, styled, and taught social etiquette like a doll being prepared for a show. Her phone buzzed, a message from Thomas. "The driver will be there in 20 minutes. Are you ready?" "Define ready," she typed back. "To face 50 of the most powerful men in New York while pretending I belong in your world? Sure." The response came quickly. You don't need to pretend anything. Just be yourself. Emma laughed bitterly. Easy for him to say. Thomas had been born into this world. For her, every event was like performing in a foreign language. The car that picked her up wasn't just a car, it was a statement on wheels. Emma sank into the soft leather, trying not to calculate how many months of rent that seat cost. When they arrived at the Plaza Hotel, Thomas was waiting at the entrance, stunning in a tuxedo that seemed to have been made specifically for him. "You look beautiful," he said, offering his arm. "You seem surprised." "I'm always surprised when someone exceeds my expectations." Emma took his arm, pretending not to notice how the touch sent small shocks through her skin. "And your expectations for me were low?" "My expectations for everyone are low. It's safer that way." The ballroom was a sea of expensive gowns and tuxedos under crystal chandeliers. Emma recognized faces from magazines, politicians, actors, heirs to fortunes. And there she was, a boutique saleswoman from Brooklyn, walking among them as if she had the right to be there. "Relax," Thomas murmured in her ear, his hand resting lightly on her back. "You're wound tight as a spring." "It's easy to relax when this is your natural habitat." "This was never my natural habitat, Emma. I just learned how to navigate it." She looked at him, surprised by the honesty. "What do you mean?" But before Thomas could answer, an older man approached, some senator from what Emma remembered of the briefing Thomas had given her. "Thomas, and this must be Emma we've heard so much about." Emma smiled politely, but inside she wondered what exactly Thomas had said about her and to whom. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Senator." "The pleasure is mine. Thomas told us you work in vintage fashion preservation. Fascinating field." Emma blinked. "Vintage fashion preservation." She opened her mouth to correct him, but felt Thomas's hand gently squeeze her waist, a silent warning. "It's a passion," she managed to say. The night continued like this, Thomas weaving an elaborate web of half-truths about Emma's background, transforming her real life into something palatable for this audience. She was the independent curator, the fashion sustainability specialist, the young entrepreneur with a unique market vision. During dinner, seated between a federal judge and an oil magnate's wife, Emma found herself not just surviving, but actually participating in conversations. Her opinions on urban gentrification were heard with interest. Her observations on social inequality sparked animated discussions. "You're quite a surprise," said Mrs. Pemberton, the magnate's wife. "Thomas usually brings companions who are more decorative." Emma nearly choked on her wine. "Other companions?" "Oh dear, you didn't know? Our Thomas collects beautiful women like works of art. Admirable for a while, then replaced by newer models." Emma felt something cold settle in her stomach. She looked across the table at Thomas, who was absorbed in a conversation about corporate mergers, apparently oblivious to the bomb that had just exploded in her world. In the car heading home, the silence was deafening. Thomas tried several times to start conversations, but Emma responded in monosyllables, staring out the window as if Manhattan were the most fascinating thing she'd ever seen. "Are you going to tell me what's wrong, or are we going to pretend this silence is comfortable?" he finally asked. "Other companions, Thomas? How many women went through this same process before me?" Thomas sighed. "Emma, how many?" she repeated, turning to face him. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. 3, maybe 4. Never anything like this." "Like what?" "Never for 6 months. Never with complications." "Complications?" Thomas stared at her, and Emma saw something in his eyes she couldn't name. "You, Emma, you're the complication." The car stopped in front of Emma's building. She opened the door but hesitated. "That story about vintage fashion preservation. You work in a boutique. You take care of clothes." It wasn't technically a lie. It was a complete reinvention of my reality. "Welcome to my world. Here, reality is negotiable." Emma got out of the car but leaned down to look at him one last time. "What if I don't want my reality to be negotiable?" Thomas didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, less controlled. "Then maybe you're the one who's going to teach me something new." As Emma climbed to her apartment, she wondered if Thomas Whitmore was proving to be a more complex teacher than she'd imagined. And the most frightening question of all, was she starting to enjoy the lessons? Palm Beach at sunset was like a painting done in shades of gold and coral. Emma stood on the presidential suite's balcony, watching the ocean stretch endlessly before her, when she felt Thomas approaching. 3 weeks had passed since the charity dinner, 3 weeks of social events, trips, and a growing tension that threatened to consume them. The gala was a success, Thomas said, stopping beside her. His tie was undone, the first buttons of his shirt open, and Emma had to force herself not to look at the exposed skin. "Define success," she replied, not taking her eyes off the horizon. "If it's by the amount of money raised for charity, then yes. If it's by the number of times I had to pretend the mayor's jokes were funny, it was a total disaster." Thomas laughed, that low sound that always made something tighten in Emma's chest. "You were perfect, as always. Perfect." Emma turned to face him. "Is that what you want? Programmed perfection?" "I want you." The words came out so simple, so direct, that Emma felt the air escape from her lungs. For weeks they'd been dancing around this attraction, maintaining a respectful distance, following the contract's rules. But here, with the sound of waves drowning out the rest of the world, the rules seemed distant and irrelevant. "Thomas," she began, but he took a step forward, closing the space between them. 3 weeks, Emma. 3 weeks watching you, listening to you, discovering how your mind works. And the only thing I've been able to conclude is that you've left me completely lost." Emma felt her heart race. "We have an agreement, rules, that I made because I thought it would be easier that way." Thomas raised his hand, hesitating for a moment before gently touching her face. "But there's nothing easy about you, Emma Taylor." The touch was gentle, almost reverent, and Emma found herself leaning into it despite herself. "This is going to complicate everything. It's already complicated." And then he kissed her. It was different from any kiss Emma had ever experienced. Thomas started slowly, almost cautiously, as if she might break or disappear. But when Emma responded, when her hands gripped the front of his shirt and she allowed herself to be pulled against him, the kiss deepened. Thomas kissed her as if he were trying to memorize her taste, as if she were the most precious thing he'd ever touched. Emma lost herself in him, in the scent of his cologne mixed with sea salt, in the way his hands tangled in her hair, in how he murmured her name against her lips. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. Thomas rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "Emma," he whispered, and there was something almost vulnerable in the way he said her name. "I know," she replied, because she understood. What was happening between them had crossed the boundaries of the contract, had become something real and frightening and impossible to ignore. Thomas opened his eyes, and Emma saw something in them she'd never seen before. Uncertainty. "Where does this leave us?" Before Emma could answer, he kissed her again, this time with more urgency. His hands found the bare skin of her back through her dress's neckline, and Emma felt every nerve ending catch fire. She pressed against him, lost in the sensation, in the desire that had been building for weeks. Thomas's hands traced her waist, moved down to her hips, and Emma moaned softly against his lips. It was too much and not enough at the same time. She wanted more, wanted everything, wanted to forget there were rules or reasons or anything besides this moment. But when Thomas began to pull down her dress's zipper, reality hit her like ice water. "Stop," she whispered, placing her hands on his chest. Thomas froze immediately, his hands stopping where they were. "Emma? I can't." She stepped away, adjusting her dress with trembling hands. "Not like this. Not yet." Thomas ran his hands through his hair, clearly struggling to control himself. "I didn't mean to pressure. You didn't pressure me. It's just..." Emma turned back to the ocean, hugging herself. "If we do this, it changes everything. And I don't know if I'm ready for everything to change." Thomas moved closer but kept his distance, respecting the space she'd created. "What do you want, Emma?" "Time," she said finally. "I need time to understand what this means." "How much time?" "I don't know." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was more controlled, but there was a warmth in it that hadn't been there before. "That's okay." "Okay? You're worth the wait, Emma. However long it takes." Emma turned to look at him, surprised by the patience in his voice. This was the man who controlled empires, who turned decisions into millions, who never waited for anything. And yet, there he was, willing to wait for her. "Thomas? Yes? What you said about wanting me. Did you mean it?" Thomas approached slowly, stopping only when he was close enough for her to feel the heat radiating from him. Every word. Emma closed her eyes, trying to process the intensity of what she was feeling. When she opened them again, Thomas was still there, looking at her, as if she were a puzzle he was determined to solve. "Does this scare you?" she asked. Thomas considered the question seriously. "It should, but strangely it doesn't. You make me want things I never thought I wanted." "Like what?" "Like a future I can't completely control." The night breeze brought the sound of waves and the smell of the sea, wrapping them in a bubble of intimacy. Emma knew she'd crossed a line today, not just physically but emotionally. Thomas was no longer just a contract or a solution to her mother's problems. He was becoming something much more dangerous. He was becoming important. And as she watched him, seeing how the moonlight highlighted the contours of his face, Emma wondered if it was already too late to protect her heart. The Hope Foundation Ball was the most prestigious event on Manhattan's social calendar, a night when high society gathered to display their generosity and secretly judge one another. Emma was getting ready in the mirror of Thomas's sweet bathroom, adjusting the borrowed diamonds that sparkled against her skin like captured stars. 2 weeks had passed since Palm Beach. 2 weeks of delicious and torturous tension, where every glance lasted a second too long, every accidental touch sent electric shocks, and every good night ended with both of them fighting the urge to break down the barriers Emma had established. "Are you ready?" Thomas appeared behind her in the mirror, stunning in the black tuxedo that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. "As ready as someone can be to face 300 people who probably make in an hour what I make in a year," Emma replied, turning to face him. Thomas studied her with that intense look she'd learned to recognize, as if he were trying to memorize every detail. "You look beautiful. You always say that, because it's always true." Emma felt the familiar warmth rise up her neck. Even after weeks, Thomas still managed to make her feel like a teenager with her first crush. "Thomas," she began, but was interrupted by a knock on the door. "Mr. Whitmore, the car is waiting," came the driver's voice. The plaza's grand ballroom was transformed into an adult fairy tale, crystal chandeliers reflecting golden light over women in dresses that cost more than cars, and men whose watches were worth more than houses. Emma recognized faces from society pages, CEOs of major corporations, even some Hollywood actors. "Breathe," Thomas murmured in her ear as they walked through the crowd. "You belong here as much as any of them." "Charming liar," she whispered back, but smiled despite herself. They were talking with a group of philanthropists when Emma saw her for the first time, a woman who made all the others seem ordinary by comparison. Tall, with platinum blonde hair pulled into an elegant chignon, she wore a red silk dress that seemed to have been painted on her perfect body, and she was looking directly at Thomas, as if he were her personal property. Emma felt something cold settle in her stomach as the woman began approaching, her walk a calculated display of confidence and power. "Thomas," the voice was smooth as honey, with an accent that suggested European education. "What a delightful surprise." Thomas stiffened beside Emma, his hand tightening almost imperceptibly on her waist. "Isabel, aren't you going to introduce me to your companion?" Isabel's eyes slid over Emma with the precision of a scanner, cataloging and judging every detail. "Emma Taylor, Isabel Hamilton," Thomas said, his voice carefully neutral. "Ah, so you're Thomas's new acquisition." Isabel extended a perfectly manicured hand. "Pleasure to meet you, dear." Emma shook the offered hand, noting how Isabel's expensive rings pressed against her fingers. "The pleasure is mine." "Emma works in vintage fashion preservation," Thomas said, and Emma recognized the softened version of her life he'd created. "How interesting," Isabel smiled, but it didn't reach her ice-blue eyes. "Thomas has always been drawn to projects." The word projects was pronounced with such condescension that Emma felt her cheeks burn. But before she could respond, Thomas intervened. "If you'll excuse us, I need to greet Senator Morrison." As Thomas walked away, Emma found herself alone with Isabel, who continued smiling that sharp smile. "May I ask you a personal question, dear?" Isabel didn't wait for an answer. "How much is he paying you?" Emma felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. "Excuse me?" "Oh, don't play dumb. Thomas has a very specific pattern. Young, beautiful, needy women. He likes to be the savior, you know. Makes him feel powerful." "I don't know what you're talking about." Isabel laughed, a crystalline and cruel sound. "Of course you do. Let me guess, you needed money for something important. Sick family? Debts?" Thomas appeared like a knight in shining armor offering a solution. Emma didn't respond, but her expression must have given everything away because Isabel's smile widened. "I thought so. You know you're not the first, right? There was Ashley, daughter of a bankrupt broker, Melissa, trying to save the family farm. And Catherine. Oh, Catherine was special. She lasted almost a year. Why are you telling me this?" "Because you seem sweet, and I don't like to see sweet women get hurt. Thomas gets bored quickly. When that happens, you'll be discarded like all the others." Emma felt the world spin slightly. "You're lying." "Am I?" Isabel tilted her head. "Thomas never mentioned we were once engaged, that I was part of this same arrangement 3 years ago. The difference is I was smart enough to belong in his world. If you were engaged, why didn't you get married?" Isabel's smile faltered for just a second. "Because I discovered he was paying other women even while we were planning our wedding. Thomas collects people, dear, especially broken people he can fix." Emma looked across the ballroom to where Thomas was talking with a group of older men. He looked so controlled, so in command, exactly like the first day they'd met. Had it all been an elaborate performance? "You're wondering if any of it was real, aren't you?" Isabel followed her gaze. "Let me save you the trouble of finding out. It wasn't. To Thomas, you're just the latest in a long line of charity projects." Emma excused herself and ran to the bathroom, her vision blurred by tears she refused to shed in public. In the mirror, she saw what Isabel had seen. A woman out of place, wearing borrowed diamonds and pretending to belong to a world that would never be hers. When she came out of the bathroom 15 minutes later, Thomas had disappeared. Emma searched for him in the ballroom, but he was nowhere to be found. A waiter told her he'd seen Mr. Whitmore leave a few minutes earlier. Emma grabbed her phone, typing a quick message. "Not feeling well. Going home." She didn't wait for a response. She couldn't face Thomas now. Not when every word from Isabel echoed in her head. Not when she was beginning to question whether everything she'd started to believe was a carefully constructed lie. As the taxi took her back to Brooklyn, Emma looked out the window at Manhattan's lights growing distant. For the first time in weeks, she felt like herself again, small, ordinary, and terribly alone. Thomas found Isabel on the plaza's terrace, smoking a cigarette with the same calculated elegance with which she did everything. The rage that had been boiling inside him since he discovered Emma had disappeared, finally overflowed. "What the hell did you say to her?" Isabel turned slowly, a satisfied smile playing on her red lips. "Thomas, darling, you look disturbed." "Emma ran out of here like she'd seen a ghost, and I have the feeling that ghost has your face. I just clarified a few things for the girl, about your history with young needy women." Thomas stepped forward, his voice dangerously low. "What history, Isabel?" "Oh, please. Ashley Morrison, Melissa Chen, Catherine Davis. Should I continue?" Isabel took a theatrical drag. "All young, all broken, all paid by you to be your company, until you got bored and moved on to the next one. You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Isabel laughed, a cutting sound. "I was your fiancé, Thomas. I saw how you operated even then. Always needing to be the savior, always collecting damaged people to fix." Thomas felt a cold fury take hold of him. "The difference between you and Emma is that Emma never needed to be fixed. She was already perfect." Isabel's smile faltered. "How romantic and completely false. You're jealous." "Jealous?" Isabel threw the cigarette away forcefully. "Of a boutique saleswoman? Please. Jealous because she achieved something you never could, making me feel something real." The words came out before Thomas could stop them, but the moment he said them, he knew they were true. Emma had done something no woman before her had managed. She'd broken down his defenses without even trying. "Go to hell, Thomas." "I'm already there," he replied, running off. Thomas spent the next 2 days looking for Emma. She didn't answer his calls, wouldn't open her apartment door, and when he went to the boutique, Mrs. Chen said she'd asked for a few days off. It was Margaret, his assistant, who finally found him in the office at 2 in the morning on the 3rd day, surrounded by crumpled papers and several cups of cold coffee. "Mr. Whitmore, Miss Taylor is at Mount Sinai Hospital, oncology wing." Thomas couldn't remember ever running so fast in his life. Emma was sitting in an uncomfortable plastic chair in the hospital corridor, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She wore jeans and a simple blouse, the first time Thomas had seen her, without the expensive dresses and borrowed jewelry that had become her armor in that strange world. She looked up when she heard him approaching, and Thomas saw something break in her expression. "How did you find me?" "It doesn't matter." Thomas knelt in front of her chair, not caring about the curious looks from passing medical staff. "Emma, about what Isabel said. Was it true?" Emma's voice was hoarse from crying. "About the other women?" Thomas closed his eyes. "Yes and no." "That's not an answer, Thomas." "Yes, there were other women. Yes, I helped them financially. No, it was never like this." He opened his eyes, meeting hers. "I never cared about any of them, Emma. They were transactions, business. And me? Am I just another business deal?" "You were." The words hurt to say, but he continued. "At first you were. But somewhere between your first sarcastic response and the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching, you became so much more." Emma shook her head. "I can't do this anymore, Thomas. I can't keep pretending I belong in your world." "Then don't pretend." "What?" Thomas took her hands, noticing how cold and trembling they were. "Forget the contract. Forget the social events and expensive clothes and all that crap. Stay with me because you want to, not because you're being paid to." Emma looked at him as if he'd gone insane. "Thomas, I love you." The words fell between them like bombs, echoing through the hospital corridor. Thomas had never said those words to anyone, not to Isabel, not to any of the others. But there, kneeling on the cold hospital floor, they seemed to be the only truth that mattered. "No," Emma whispered, tears beginning to fall again. "You can't say that now." "Why not?" "Because my mother is dying." The word came out like a muffled scream. "The doctors said the treatment isn't working. She has maybe weeks, not months." Thomas felt the world stop. "Emma, and I fell in love with you." The words came out between sobs. "Even knowing it was stupid, even knowing we were from different worlds, I fell in love with you. And now, I don't know if any of it was real." Thomas raised his hands to frame her face, his thumbs wiping away the tears. "This is real. What I feel for you is real. The rest we can figure out together." "How?" "Marry me." Emma stopped crying, staring at him as if he were a stranger. "What?" "Marry me. Not as part of a contract or an agreement. Marry me because I can't imagine my life without you in it." "Thomas, you're crazy." "Probably." He smiled through his own tears. "But I'm crazy in love with you, Emma Taylor. And if you give me a chance, a real chance, not a contract, I'll spend the rest of my life proving that this is true." A nurse appeared in the corridor. "Miss Taylor, your mother is awake and asking for you." Emma stood up, wiping her face with the back of her hands. I need to go." "I know." She hesitated, looking at him. "Thomas." "Yes?" "Give me time to think." "However much time you need." As Emma disappeared down the corridor toward her mother's room, Thomas remained kneeling on the cold floor, realizing that for the first time in his adult life, his future was completely out of his control. And strangely, it didn't scare him as much as it should have, because for the first time he'd found someone who was worth more than any power or control he could wield. A week passed in strange limbo. Thomas respected Emma's request for space, but every day he sent flowers to the hospital, not extravagant arrangements that screamed money, but simple daisies that he remembered her mentioning were her mother's favorites. Emma spent her days in room 314, watching her mother fight a battle they both knew she was losing. Sarah Taylor had always been a small woman, but now she seemed fragile as paper, her eyes still bright with the intelligence and love that had guided Emma throughout her life. "Are you going to tell me about him, or are we going to keep pretending those flowers magically appear every day?" Sarah asked on a Thursday afternoon, her voice hoarse, but still with that motherly tone that didn't accept lies. Emma looked up from the book she was pretending to read. "Mom, Emma Catherine Taylor. I have cancer. I'm not blind. And I'm definitely not stupid." Sarah pointed to the fresh daisies on the windowsill. "Those flowers cost a fortune to have every day, and you've been walking around looking like you lost your best friend and won $1 million at the same time." Emma sighed, closing the book. "It's complicated. The best things usually are. He asked me to marry him." Sarah tried to sit up straighter in bed. And I don't know what to do. Do you love him?" The simple question hit Emma like a punch. "Does that matter?" "Honey, it's the only thing that matters." Emma stood up, walking to the window. "Yes, I love him. More than I thought it was possible to love someone, but you're scared. We're from completely different worlds, Mom. He's Thomas Whitmore, CEO, millionaire, a man who dines with senators and has more money than I can imagine. And I'm me." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Can I meet him?" "Mom, Emma, if my daughter is going to marry a man, I want to meet him before I die." The word die still made Emma flinch, but she nodded. "I'll call him." Thomas arrived 2 hours later, carrying not flowers but a small potted lavender plant. Emma watched from the doorway as he approached her mother's bed, his usual confidence replaced by something resembling nervousness. "Mrs. Taylor," he said, his voice gentler than Emma had ever heard. "I'm Thomas, the man who's been filling my room with flowers," Sarah replied, but she was smiling, "and who made my daughter look like she was struck by lightning." Thomas smiled back. Guilty on both counts. "Sit down," Sarah ordered, pointing to the chair beside the bed. "I want to meet the man who won my Emma's heart." What followed was one of the most surreal conversations of Emma's life. Her mother, who had never known anything beyond Brooklyn's working class, talked with Thomas Whitmore as if they were old friends. She asked about his work, his family, his plans for the future, and Thomas responded with an honesty Emma had never seen in him. "Can I ask you a personal question, Thomas?" Sarah asked after an hour. "Of course. Why my daughter?" Thomas looked at Emma, then back at Sarah. "Because she made me want to be a better man. Because when she laughed at my bad jokes, I felt like I had conquered the world. Because she's brave and smart and has a heart big enough to love even when she should protect herself." "And do you love her?" "More than my own life." Sarah nodded slowly. "Good answer." She extended her thin hand, taking Thomas's. "But let me be clear about one thing." "Yes, ma'am." "If you hurt my daughter, if you make her feel like she's not good enough for you for even 1 second, I will come back from the grave and haunt you for the rest of your miserable life." Thomas laughed, gently squeezing her hand. "I accept those terms. And one more thing. Whatever you need." Sarah looked directly into his eyes. "Never let fear win over love. Promise me that." "I promise." That night, Emma walked with Thomas to the hospital parking lot. The silence between them was loaded with everything they hadn't said. "Your mother is incredible," Thomas said finally. "She liked you. That's rare." "Emma." Thomas stopped walking, turning to face her. "What your mother said, Matt, about not letting fear win over love. She was talking to me, but I think she was also talking to you." Emma felt tears burn her eyes. "Thomas, marry me." This time his voice was steady, without the desperation from a week ago. "Not because you need the money, not because it's part of some contract. Marry me because you love me. What if it doesn't work out? What if we find out we're too incompatible?" "What if it does work out?" Thomas took her hands. "What if we find out we're exactly what each other needs?" Emma looked at him, really looked. She saw the man who had shown up at the hospital uninvited, who had knelt on the cold floor to declare his love, who had talked with her dying mother with kindness and respect. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, yes. I'll marry you." Thomas kissed her right there in the hospital parking lot, under the fluorescent lights and the smell of disinfectant, and Emma thought she'd never been in a more perfect place. 3 days later, Thomas returned to the hospital. This time he knelt beside Sarah's bed, not Emma's. "Mrs. Taylor, I'd like to ask for your blessing to marry your daughter." Sarah smiled, her hands trembling as she touched his face. "You have my blessing, son, and my gratitude. You'll take care of her when I can't anymore." "With my life," Thomas promised. "Good answer," Sarah repeated, but this time her words came out as a whisper. Emma watched from the doorway, knowing she was witnessing something sacred, the passing from one generation to the next, love being transferred from one form to another. And when Thomas stood up and extended his hand to her, Emma knew she was ready for what came next. The fear was still there, but love was bigger. Love would always be bigger. 3 months had passed since Sarah Taylor had closed her eyes for the last time, holding Emma's hand with one of hers and Thomas's with the other. The funeral had been simple, as she'd asked. Garden flowers instead of expensive arrangements, shared stories instead of formal speeches, and the kind of genuine love that no amount of money could buy. Now Emma stood on the terrace of the mansion in Alpharetta, Georgia, watching the morning sun filter through the garden trees. Thomas's house was different from what she'd expected. Not the cold fortress of glass and steel she'd imagined, but an old brick construction with wild gardens and cozy corners that seemed made to embrace whoever lived there. "Coffee?" Thomas appeared behind her, 2 steaming cups in his hands. "Thank you." Emma accepted the cup, noticing how he still seemed slightly surprised to find her there every morning, as if he still couldn't believe she'd chosen to stay. They'd gotten married 2 weeks after Sarah's death, in a small ceremony at a church in Connecticut. It hadn't been the fairy tale wedding that society magazines expected. Emma had worn her mother's wedding dress, altered by a local seamstress, and Thomas had cried when she walked down the aisle to the sound of an out-of-tune organ. "How are you feeling about today?" Thomas asked, sitting in the chair next to hers. Today was the official opening day of Emma's boutique, Vintage Reverie, in downtown Alpharetta. Thomas had insisted on financing the project, but Emma had been firm. It would be a loan, with market-rate interest and a proper payment plan. She wanted to build something of her own, not have something given to her. Nervous, excited, scared that nobody will show up. Emma smiled over the rim of her cup. "The usual opening day feelings, I imagine. You're going to kill it. You have to say that. You're my husband." "I say that because it's true." Thomas took her free hand. "Emma, in the past months, I've watched you transform an empty space into a work of art. I've watched you win over the trust of women who'd never heard of you. You're going to kill it because that's who you are." Emma felt that familiar wave of warmth that always came when Thomas looked at her that way, as if she were the most precious thing in his world. "Thomas? Yeah? I'm happy." The words were simple, but Thomas smiled as if she'd given him the world. "Me too." The morning passed in a rush of last-minute preparations. Emma was adjusting a mannequin when she felt a strange wave of dizziness. She leaned against the wall, waiting for it to pass, but instead, her stomach lurched violently. She barely made it to the bathroom in time. "Emma?" Her assistant Lily's voice came from the other side of the door. "Are you okay?" I'm fine," Emma managed to answer, though she clearly wasn't. "Must be nerves." But when it happened again an hour later, and then once more when Thomas arrived for lunch, Emma began to suspect it wasn't nerves. "You look pale," Thomas observed, touching her forehead. "Maybe we should cancel the opening." "Absolutely not." Emma pulled away from his hand. "I'm fine." But she wasn't fine. All afternoon, waves of nausea hit her at random moments. When she finally sent Lily home and closed the boutique, Emma drove straight to the pharmacy. 3 tests, all positive. Emma stared at the 2 pink lines on the last test, her mind completely blank. Pregnant. She was pregnant. She and Thomas had talked about children in abstract terms, someday in the future, when they were more established, when they had more time. But someday had become today, and Emma didn't know how she felt about it. She drove home on autopilot, the tests hidden in her purse like small bombs waiting to explode their carefully constructed life. Thomas was in the kitchen when she arrived, preparing dinner with the concentration he applied to everything in his life. He'd become a surprisingly good cook in recent months, discovering that he enjoyed the precision and creativity it required. "How was the rest of the afternoon?" he asked without turning from the stove. It was good. Emma dropped her purse on the kitchen table, the tests practically burning a hole through the leather. Thomas? I need to tell you something. Something in her voice made him turn around completely. What is it? Emma pulled one of the tests from her purse, placing it on the table between them. I'm pregnant. Thomas stared at the small plastic device for a long moment, as if it were a puzzle he needed to decipher. Then he looked at Emma, and she saw something she hadn't expected in his eyes. Pure joy. Pregnant, he repeated, as if testing the word. I know we didn't plan this. I know it's too early. I know that. Thomas crossed the kitchen in 3 long strides, taking Emma in his arms and spinning her through the air. We're having a baby? Thomas, put me down before I throw up on you. Emma laughed despite herself. He set her down gently, but kept his hands on her waist. Sorry. It's just... Emma, we're going to have a baby. Are you happy? Happy? Thomas laughed, a rich and genuine sound. Emma, I'm beyond happy. There's no word for what I'm feeling. Emma felt tears burn her eyes, tears of relief, of joy, of overflowing love. So you want this? You want to have a family with me? I want everything with you. Thomas framed her face with his hands. I want to build a life with you, have children with you, grow old with you. I want to wake up every day for the next 50 years knowing that you're mine. He kissed her then, soft and reverent, as if she was something sacred, and Emma thought maybe she was. The two of them together, creating life, building a future that neither of them had imagined possible just a few months before. I'm scared, she whispered against his lips. Me too. But we'll be scared together. Emma laughed through her tears. That's not very comforting. Then let me try again. Thomas rested his forehead against hers. Emma Whitmore, you're going to be an incredible mother, and I'm going to do everything in my power to be the kind of father our child deserves. Emma Whitmore, she repeated, smiling. I'm still getting used to that. We have the rest of our lives for you to get used to it. As they stood there in the kitchen, embracing in the golden light of sunset, Emma felt something settle deep in her chest, a sense of completeness she'd never experienced. They'd started as strangers brought together by a misunderstanding, but somehow they'd become a family. And now, with new life growing inside her, Emma finally understood what her mother had meant about never letting fear win over love. 6 months later, Emma sat on the mansion's terrace, one hand resting on her rounded belly, watching Thomas teach her mother, who had miraculously recovered and now visited once a month, how to make her famous vegetarian lasagna. The scene was so domestically perfect that sometimes Emma had to pinch herself to make sure it was real. No, Thomas, you're putting too much cheese. Her mother's voice floated through the open kitchen window. Mum, there's no such thing as too much cheese when it comes to lasagna, Thomas replied, and Emma smiled, hearing the genuine affection in his voice when he called her Mom. Sarah's miraculous recovery had been as unexpected as it was complete. The doctors couldn't explain it. Maybe it was the new experimental treatment. Maybe it was the happiness of seeing her daughter married and pregnant. Or maybe it was simply the power of love being stronger than any medical diagnosis. Emma, dear, come help us before your husband ruins my recipe, Sarah shouted from inside the house. Emma stood up slowly, her hands supporting her aching back. At 7 months pregnant, she'd developed a new appreciation for the phrase big as a house, but Thomas seemed to find her more beautiful every day. In the kitchen, she found the familiar scene. Thomas covered in flour up to his elbows, trying to follow her mother's meticulous instructions, who supervised every movement with the intensity of a general commanding troops. You know he runs $1 billion company, right? Emma said to her mother, kissing her cheek. Running a company and making lasagna are completely different skills, Sarah replied seriously. One requires logic, the other requires soul. Thomas rolled his eyes but was smiling. Your mother is a culinary tyrant. And you love it, Emma shot back, stealing a piece of cheese from the bowl. I hate to admit it, but yes. They worked together in the kitchen, 3 people who had become a family in ways none of them had planned. Emma watched Thomas and her mother argue about the proper amount of seasoning and felt her heart overflow with gratitude. Later that night, after Sarah had gone to the guest room and the lasagna had been devoured with appropriate praise, Emma and Thomas were back on the terrace. The night was warm and scented with jasmine from the garden, and stars dotted the sky like diamonds scattered on black velvet. "Remember when you said I was a complication?" Emma asked, settling against Thomas's chest on the double chaise lounge they'd bought specifically for these nights. Thomas ran his fingers through her hair. "The best complication I ever had. Our daughter is going to be even more complicated. She's going to be perfect." "How are you so sure it's a girl?" "Male intuition," Emma laughed. "That's not a real thing." "Yes, it is. And she's going to be exactly like you, stubborn, smart, and completely capable of driving me crazy with love." Emma turned her head to look at him. "Do you really think we're going to make it? That we'll be good parents?" Thomas was quiet for a moment, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I don't know if we'll be good parents from day one, but I know we'll try with everything we have, and I know our daughter will grow up knowing she's loved." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I look at you and see the kind of woman who sacrificed for her mother, who built a life from scratch, who had the courage to love a stubborn man like me. If that woman is my daughter's mother, she'll grow up knowing she can conquer anything." Emma felt familiar tears burn her eyes. Pregnancy had made her emotionally unstable. But this was different. This was pure love manifesting in liquid form. "What if I told you I also think it's a girl?" "Then we're officially in trouble," Thomas laughed. "Why? Because two stubborn Whitmore women in the same house? I'm going to spend the rest of my life being outnumbered." "And do you hate being outnumbered?" Thomas kissed the top of her head. "Emma, before you, I controlled everything. Every decision, every outcome, every variable. It was lonely, but it was safe. And now? Now I wake up every day not knowing exactly what to expect. You constantly surprise me. And in a few months, we're going to have a little person who will surprise us even more. It's terrifying and wonderful at the same time." Emma settled deeper against him, feeling the baby kick against her ribs as if agreeing with the conversation. "Thomas?" "Yeah?" Who would have thought it all started with a message sent to the wrong number? Thomas was quiet for a moment, and Emma felt his chest rise and fall with a deep breath. "It wasn't a mistake," he said finally, his voice low and full of conviction. "What do you mean?" "That message, that wrong number, the way everything unfolded. It wasn't a mistake, Emma. It was destiny." Emma turned in his arms so she could see him properly. "Do you really believe that?" "I believe some things are bigger than coincidence. I believe you were exactly what I needed at the exact moment I needed it, even though neither of us knew it at the time. What if I had never typed the wrong number? Then I'd still be sitting in my office, controlling numbers on a spreadsheet, thinking that was living." Thomas gently touched her belly. "Instead of being here, with my pregnant wife in my arms, waiting for our daughter to be born, with your mother in the house next door making plans to spoil our daughter rotten." Emma laughed through her tears. "She's definitely going to spoil her. Completely. And it's going to be wonderful." They fell silent for a moment, absorbing the simple perfection of the moment. The garden whispered around them, the night wrapped them like a blanket, and Emma felt a deep peace settle in her bones. "Emma? Yeah? Thank you." "For what?" "For typing the wrong number. For being brave enough to answer my messages. For giving me a chance when I didn't deserve one. For teaching me that some things are more important than control." Emma stretched up to kiss him, a soft kiss full of promises for the future. "Thank you." "For what?" "For answering." And there, under the Georgia stars, with her mother sleeping in the next room and her baby gently kicking inside her, Emma knew Thomas was right. It hadn't been a mistake. It had been exactly what destiny had planned all along. Sometimes love arrives in the most unexpected way, through a mistyped number, through a misunderstanding that transforms into perfect understanding. Emma and Thomas discovered that destiny has its own plans, even when we think we're in control. A lost message became a life found, proving that the most beautiful mistakes are those that lead us exactly where we're supposed to be. And maybe in the end, there are no wrong numbers, just connections waiting to happen. If this story touched you, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments. Where are you listening to this story from? Your support is what allows us to keep bringing you stories like this.